And many of them, not all of them, but many of them Yeshua did. We don't know all that Yeshua did because not everything's recorded, but we know that he did certain of these because they're recorded. For example, the urchatz, the washing of the hands. We see that Yeshua changed this custom and washed their feet instead. John 13, 1 through 14. In our Passover Seder, we have a hand washing ceremony, and we also do a foot washing. The karpas, eating the green vegetables. This refers to the place in the Seder when the celebrants dip a green vegetable in salt water and eat it. And this, we see Yeshua doing this in John 13, 26 to 27. Now these things aren't commanded in the Torah, but this is some good Jewish tradition that Yeshua embraced and incorporated into his supper. But why did he do that? Because he was telling the Passover story. The Jews like to teach things. It's a Hebraic model to teach things by doing them. By stepping through. We are actually doing like a play. We're actually stepping through things, and it's like a play. We're acting out the play by doing them. And it's a good way to teach the truths of the Bible. Reinforce them in our minds and teach them to the younger generation. And people who've never done a Passover Seder before, the first time they do it, I've heard many tell me over the years, it's like the Bible comes alive to them. They've never done one before. And suddenly the message of the cross and coming out of Egypt, it just comes alive and it's exciting for them. And they really get excited about it. It's a great thing. It's a beautiful one. And it's fun. You're doing things. You're eating. You're telling stories. You're interactive. All kinds of things going on. And that's what we do. The next one. Now this actually the salt water, the eating of the green vegetables, and by dipping in salt water, that's a picture of the tears that were shed by the slaves, by the Hebrew slaves when they were in the land of Egypt. A lot of tears were shed because of the slavery, the servitude, the murder of the innocents, the firstborn. And then you have the yachas, the breaking of the bread. The middle of three pieces of bread, the matzah is ceremonially broken in two. Matzah is unleavened bread. The larger piece is wrapped in a napkin and set aside, called the afikomen. The matzah that is eaten at the end of the meal. The matzah that is eaten at the end of the meal. This can be seen in Luke 22:19. When it is recorded, he took the bread and gave thanks and broke it. This is the bread of communion. And gave it unto them, saying, this is my body which is given for you. When you we're just kind of hitting the highlights here, but when you do the Passover Seder, all of this will be explained. You'll have a little book in front of you called Haggadah, and you'll be able to see it and understand it and read the scriptures, and we tie it all together. Then Yeshua makes reference to the second cup when praying in Gethsemane. Yeshua, the second cup, or the cup of deliverance from the wrath or judgment of Elohim. The Magid concludes with a second cup of wine, which is called the cup of deliverance. Yeshua partook of this second cup at the Garden of Gethsemane, Luke 22, 42 through 44. In the telling the story of the Exodus, each person is to see the Exodus as if Elohim personally redeemed them. This is based on Exodus 13 verse 8. Again, I'm skimming over this very quickly. If you go to our hoshanarabah.org website, HOSHANARABBAH.org website, and go to the teachings page and click on the appointed times, the biblical feasts, and go to one of my teachings around the Passover. I think it's entitled When is Passover? You will see there's a whole article in there on this, and we go through this in more detail. This is just a quick teaching I'm giving right now. The next part, another part of the Passover Seder is called the matzah, the eating of the unleavened bread. And Yeshua did this in Matthew 26, verse 26. In John 13:23, we can see the disciples were leaning or reclining. This practice is still a tradition in the modern Passover Seder. This custom symbolizes freedom from the bondage of Egypt, or a picture of sin. The Israelites in one day went from being slaves to being a kingdom of priests. Exodus 19, verse 6. Just like the day that you got saved, you got born again and asked Yeshua to take control of your life. You went from being a slave in one day to being a child of the king. Being a redeemed Israelite, to being a potential bride of Yeshua the Messiah. In one day. Same thing with the Israelites. Only kings and those who live in ease recline while eating. And the believers of Yeshua are kings and priests before Elohim. It says in Revelation 1:6 and 5:10. And again, I think it's in chapter 20, verse 6. The saints will be kings and priests in his kingdom. In 1 John 2, verse 7, is it? It says, you are a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a holy priesthood. This is what we are. All right. The next part of the Passover Seder is called the Shulchan Orech. It means the festive meal. Actually, Shulchan means table. Orech means meal anyway. Yeshua instructed the disciples to prepare for the Passover in Luke 22:8, which could have included purchasing a Passover lamb, which they would have eaten during the Shulchan Orech, part of the Seder. This primary meaning of the Greek word pasha is Passover sacrifice for lamb. The meal or service itself is a secondary meaning. So when he said Passover lamb, the word Pesach in Hebrew can mean the actual sacrifice, the lamb that was sacrificed. It can also refer to the day, or the Passover day, as well as the meal that was, hi boys, the meal that was eaten during that time. So the word Passover can have several different meanings. In this case, when Yeshua said Passover, he could be referring to the day, the supper, or the sacrifice that they were eating. It can the term Passover can mean all of those things, the lamb that they were eating. All right. The next thing you have is the maror. Bitter herbs are blessed to be. Maror is a bitter herb. These bitter herbs are symbolized by romaine lettuce and horseradish. And again, this pictures the bitterness of the servitude and the bitterness of the bondage and even that the Israelites endured while they were in the land of Egypt. And also there was bitterness for the Egyptians who went under great, tremendous, bitter plagues and judgments. And then you have the Hallel, or the praise hymn. This is something that's done at the end of the Seder. We sing a song. In ancient times, Psalms 115 to 118 were chanted in special praise to Elohim. The fourth cup is now filled. A door is open for Elijah to enter and proclaim the coming of Messiah. And we see in, maybe I don't have it here in my notes. I guess not. But it said in one of the, I forget where it is right now. I'm sorry, I don't have that. But it said that they sang a hymn. At the Last Supper, the disciples sang a hymn. So we see a number of indications in the Last Supper that roughly follow the order of the modern day Passover Seder. And so my line of reasoning is very simple. If it walks like a duck, acts like a duck, looks like a duck, and sounds like a duck, it probably is a duck. If the disciples and Yeshua called it the Passover Seder, or called it the Passover, and they did all the things that Jews have been doing as part of their Passover Seder for thousands of years, then by God, it probably was a Passover Seder. Even though he did it early. He had to do it early because he couldn't be doing it while he was hanging on the cross, being the Passover. That would have been impossible. And that's why the Passover Seder is very relevant. Yeshua set us the example, and it's for believers, it's for us. And if we want to follow the example of Yeshua when he said, and teach them all things I have commanded you. That was in the Great Commission in Matthew 28. And then Paul says, follow me as I follow Yeshua. What is that? 1 Corinthians 11:1. Follow me as I follow Yeshua. Paul followed and obeyed Yeshua. I think we ought to be doing the same thing. That's why we do a full Passover Seder. And I want to encourage all believers everywhere, in all churches, to do a Passover Seder. Find out when the proper time is and do it on the right day. So that way you can call it a Passover Seder. It's not just a imitation, but the real thing. And then do it. And worship and honor your Savior in the middle of it all, or through it all. Here it is. And they sang a final hymn. That would have been in Matthew 26, 30 and Mark 14, 26, where it mentions they sing a hymn at the end of the Seder, at the conclusion, the Nirtzah of the Seder. Now, Yeshua and his disciples extended an invitation to you to celebrate the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For we read, at the Last Supper, Yeshua instructed his disciples, if I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done. If you know these things, happy are you if you do them. So he said, wash the feet. But I think we could also say that he wants us to not only wash the feet, but he wants us to do communion and all the other aspects of the Seder, because it's commanded so in the Torah. Tell your children the story of the Exodus, and we see the example of Yeshua doing it, and therefore we should do it. And as I said earlier, Matthew 28:20, part of the Great Commission, he commanded his disciples to teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded to you. So he's commanded us to do these things, we need to do them. Then Paul said, I got ahead of myself there, imitate me, just as I also imitate the Messiah. 1 Corinthians 11:1. And then we see in the book of Acts 20 verse 6, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in the 5 days joined them to Troas, where we stayed 7 days. Now it doesn't say they did the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but the hint is there that they probably did, otherwise what relevance would have been for them to mention it here. And also, if we couple this verse in Acts 20 verse 6 with what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5:8, he says, therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. There's only one feast that fits this definition, and that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover, which go back to back. They're almost in the Gospels, they're synonymous terms. They were 2 separate days in Leviticus 23, but they're synonymous terms. Passover was on the 14th day of the first month, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread began on the 15th day of the first month. But Passover was kept at the end of the 14th day, going into the 15th day, the evening of the day. Remember, days begin in the evening in the Hebrew calendar. And so the Passover Seder was being kept at the end of the 14th, going into the 15th, going into the first day of Haganatzot, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's why when we do our Passover Seder, we start in the late afternoon, just before the setting of the sun, on the 14th. Now, we spend all afternoon setting it up, preparing it. We're cooking the lamb, we're setting the tables up, and my family and I take the day off of work, my kids take time off of school, and then we sometimes get some volunteers, and we set up a beautiful meal with candles and tablecloths and beautiful decorations, and then people bring their food, and we get it all set up, and we start before sundown, and then we go till 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. It usually lasts for about 6 hours or more. That includes a meal and foot washing and everything. So therefore, I leave you with this. You are cordially invited to celebrate the Passover. So, Hag Pesach, or Happy Passover. Have a joyous Passover. Hallelujah. Now, I saw there was one hand that went up. Do we have any questions? I want to get down. I don't know if you remember what your question was, but you're welcome to answer it, to give it. We'll try to answer it.
That was not a question, but when you were telling that if you are in a hole, how you can get out from the hole without Jehovah's help. I remember I saw a slide, very interesting. It was said one man got into the hole and he couldn't get out from the hole, and he was sitting there all night. Then another man came during the night close to the hole, and he said to him, well, you need to meditate a couple days a day, and then maybe you will reach some spiritual holiness. You will be able to get out from the hole.
Levitate out of the hole, huh?
So he was doing that, nothing happened. Another man came.
So that takes care of your Eastern religions. That takes care of like Buddhism, Hinduism. That's good. I like that.
Then another man came to the hole, and he said to him, well, you will kneel and pray to Allah. I don't remember the exact words. If you will pray 3 times a day, 40 times to Allah, so it's Islam.
Yeah.
So maybe then you will be able to get out from the hole. So he did that. Nothing happened. He was trying to get out from the hole himself, but he couldn't. And then during the day, another person showed up. And on this little video, it was, he couldn't see his face. It was all light. And he was expecting him to tell other details, what to do to get out from the hole. But this person didn't tell anything. He threw a rope, and then the man saw the rope, and thought that he needed to climb out. But then this person who threw a rope went down to him, picked him up, put his on his shoulders, and get out from the hole himself and brought him up. That was in short.
There you go. Beautiful story.
That was a wonderful.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Kevin.
My question was all about this early observance situation, because I know that it's been a bone of contention throughout with many people. And it seems somewhat logical to me that as Israel grew, that the tribe of Levi became much more arduous, the work and everything, in order to get all of this meat sanctified and ready for Passover for everybody.
Up on the Temple Mount, if you go read Edersheim, they were spending, there were tens of thousands of lambs that were being killed. There would be like about 300,000 people that would come to Jerusalem, and basically one lamb would be good for about 10 people. And so you just figure out, do the math, 10 into 300,000, you're talking about 30,000 lambs that were slaughtered up there. And they had to do it in shifts, and it took all day. And they are all these Levites, so you're absolutely right.
So it seems to me, humans being what they are, humans. There's going to be the earth crowd, the middle crowd, and the late crowd.
Well, I think that's good. I don't know how many of you butchered sheep, but I butchered hundreds of them, personally, growing up on a sheep farm. And you don't just butcher a sheep overnight. I mean, it takes a few minutes. Okay. If you do a front end, it's the same idea. When you slaughter, you shoot a deer. You got to go through certain steps. And from the time that you kill it till you gut it, you skin it, gut it, it's going to take you, even if you're really good, it's going to take you probably an hour or two. And then you got to cook the thing, which is going to take about 3 hours over an open fire, a skewer. So you've got 4 or 5 hours in there just the lamb itself. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay? And then you just go to the freezer and pull out a leg of lamb. And even a leg of lamb, it takes a couple hours to cook. If you do slow cooking. So, anyway, yeah.
Sorry.
It's all right. No, it's all right. No, you're doing
Okay,
fine.
I have a question. My other one was, okay, the difference or the time together for Karpov and Morar, in that they're both, Karpov had to do with the tears of bitterness, and Morar was the bitter herbs, right? So they seem so much similar to me. One has to do with the Seder.
There's overlap. And we explain that. We have a Haggadah that we have actually published. And if you come to our Seder, if you're going to be with us, you need to let my wife know. Because we have limited space. We have a room with 40 people. And I think we've got some extra room. But you need to let her know so she can put you on the list. But maybe I need to get your phone number and all your contact. Oh, okay, great. I'll let her know. But yes, we have a Haggadah that we have published. It's spiral bound. You can open up. Everybody gets a copy, and we will explain that. But yeah, there's some things that are very similar, and different ways to explain the same way. You really want the kids to understand it. Go ahead, Lady Springer. We'll go back to you.
I have a question on this verse, Matthew 26:17. That we read in the beginning. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Yeshua and asked, "Where do you want to prepare the Passover?" But the first day of unleavened bread, that is the 15th.
Well, that brings up, yes, that's correct. If you go read, and I'm glad you brought that up, the terms unleavened bread and Passover are used interchangeably by the Jews, by the disciples. They viewed Passover as part of unleavened bread and unleavened bread as part of Passover. Though in the Torah they are two distinct days, they were looked upon. They would say Passover, and they meant unleavened bread. In other words, both days. And they say unleavened bread, and meant the 14th and the 15th. Okay, so just like, for example, the Feast of Pentecost has 4 different names in the Torah. In the Bible. 3 different names in the Torah. It's called Shavuot, which means weeks or Feast of Weeks. That's its most common name. It's also called the Feast of the Harvest of First Fruits. And it's also called, 3 names. It's called Pentecost in the book of Acts. There are also, I'm trying to think of an example, maybe somebody can think of one, where sometimes we have one name for 2 different things, or two names for, they're interchangeable. When you said Passover in that time, people knew you were talking about unleavened bread and Passover since they were back to back and overlapped. If you said Passover, they knew you were talking about unleavened bread because they were back to back. But technically, they're 2 separate days. Okay, so that's why in that case, the gospel writer is referring to both of those together, but he's specifically referring to the Passover part of this whole feast. Yes, because remember, when the Israelites, Passover was an Aliyah festival. In other words, 3 times a year, the Israelites were to go up to Jerusalem, or in this case, Jerusalem, to keep the feast. They did it at Passover, unleavened bread. They did it at Pentecost. They did it at the Feast of Tabernacles. So when you left your towns and you got your baggage and all your stuff, and you walked, you hiked, up to Jerusalem, you were going up there to keep the Passover / unleavened bread. I mean, you could say unleavened bread. It was all one big feast that you were going up to keep.
So they started preparing that on the 13th, or right when the 14th?
They would have had to start preparing it early, but they would have been eating it. They would have slaughtered it probably on the 13th because it takes a few hours. Or they could have done it sundown. I don't know all that they did. But they were doing it at night. It was happening at night, so it was on the 14th. And remember, he went out to the Garden of Gethsemane. It was about midnight. So it was a very late night, and then that's when he was praying in the garden, and then a little bit later that night, maybe in the early morning, is when Judas and that rabble came and they arrested him.
Most likely it's just the 14th of he started the Passover, the 14th, and they came to him.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. What he did was on the 14th. It was on the early part of the Passover. Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose her question somewhat brings forth other questions, but at least it doesn't mean. In terms of, I know that Passover is high holy day.
Yes.
All right? And in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first day, it was high holy day.
Well, the term High Holy Day is only used once in the Scriptures, and it's used in it's found in the Gospels, and it's used. I think it's in Luke. I don't remember. I think it's in Luke, but it's in reference to when Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were trying to get the body down off the cross, and they wanted to get it into the grave or into Joseph's tomb before the setting of the sun, because it was a high holy day. Now, in the Christian church, they teach that Yeshua was in the grave from Friday to Sunday. Well, this would not make sense. First of all, that's not 3 days and 3 nights. Friday night to Sunday morning is not 3 days and 3 nights. And Yeshua said, "I'll be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights." That's part of 3 days and part of 3 nights, and that's not 72 hours. So that's bogus. We know he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights if we were to take literally what he said. But also they had to get the body in the grave before the high holy day. Exactly, because you couldn't do that. You could not be preparing the body. So unless the high holy day, the first day of unleavened bread, was on a weekly Sabbath, which it could have been, it probably wasn't on Friday. But we know it wasn't on Friday because he resurrected on the day of first fruits, Yom HaBekarim, which was on a Sunday, which means he would have gone to the grave at the end of the day on Friday.